Hello, welcome, Rob. How are you today?
Thanks, Keith. How are you?
I'm pretty good. We are obviously here talking right now because Evil Dead Burn is about to make its way into cinemas here. One of the things that's been discussed kind of quite a bit in the industry here is the increasing importance of paying attention to what audiences want and delivering on that. And horror as a genre has always been, it seems to me, particularly good at that. You know, they know what audiences want and they know how to deliver it. So, with Evil Dead Burn, were there any boxes that you were kind of particularly keen to see ticked on this one to make sure that it was going to work for audiences?
Part of the appeal of The Evil Dead is that it's designed solely for audiences. So, what we do is each one has a different director. It's kind of their vision within the playbox of The Evil Dead. Oh, there's a book, it does this. And we let them do kind of what they want. And my partner Sam Raimi and I started in the business with back in the days of Super 8 and having to play movies for your friends on a Super 8 projector, or in our case, at college when we were getting started, so that you sat with the audience. And so we learned quickly we never wanted to bore them, and we always wanted to find a way to viscerally, whether it was through comedy or horror or whatever, speak to them to keep them engaged. So when we made the very first Evil Dead movie, that was our sole intention of, in that case, punishing the audience. Um, but the audience was our main focus. We never made an Evil Dead movie, and really never made a movie where the sole desire was to entertain the audience and thinking first and foremost. And kind of the knock on of that is we pay very close attention to the preview audience when we go out and do previews. What are they saying? Do they not understand something? Are they confused? Because yeah, that the sole desire is to make sure they understand and can go along for the ride, and there's nothing that interrupts their total immersion in the experience we're presenting.
How far out do you do those preview screenings? How much kind of latitude do you leave yourselves if comments come back that you think, yeah, we should do something about that?
Typically, there's a process that you start the previews, some sort of previews, 11 weeks after you stop shooting. So the director gets his 9 or 10 weeks to do something, and then you spend a week putting sound on so that you can play the movie for an audience, even though it's missing all the visual effects and final sound and final music. Um, and then hopefully it goes smoothly, and you only have to do 2 or 3 of those, or you can end up doing 8 or 9 of those. And we've done it so that you're previewing on a Tuesday and then previewing the following Thursday week. The following week, you make some editorial changes. What often happens is out of those previews, the director and the producer and the studio all learn the audience doesn't understand that, and that leads to going back and doing pickups or reshoots. And when you go back, it's great because you know exactly why you're going back and where there's a lack of clarity or where the picture needs a little boost in order to uh, make it a better ride for everyone. I had partners. I had partners for a bunch of years, not in the Evil Dead, but in something we had, Ghost House Pictures, and I kept fighting with them that we should build that reshoot, that going back for a week or 10 days into the budget so that it's not a total surprise when it happens. But they never wanted to do that. But I would say half of Hollywood movies, if not more, um, go through a pickup or reshoot process after the previews.
Don't be spoilery, but did you change anything on Evil Dead Burn as a result of going through that process?
On Evil Dead Burn, we went back and picked up some material. Some that we needed to make the story clearer, some that wasn't shot. We just kind of ran out of time, and we thought we could get away without it. And there was specific things in Evil Dead Burn that the audience wanted connection, a better connection to the previous movie and to clarity on who are some of the backstory kind of lore that goes with the Evil Dead, the book. Who are these guys? What's happening? So we strengthened those kind of things and beefed up a couple of sequences that we wanted to see play better. We added a coda because the audience had a question what happened to one of the characters that was that tested very well. So we went back and shot a scene that plays down in the credit sequence to kind of
Hmm.
put a fun spin on what happened to that character.
So it opens Thursday. It will do its stuff. I saw a bit of stuff out of the US trades over the weekend saying what the sort of the expectations were for its earnings and that. Do you pay much attention to that stuff? I mean, do you have targets, or do you just know what you can reasonably expect to spend and reasonably expect to make?
It's very tricky to believe any of the early projections that come out. Many pictures in the last week either go up in the expectations or go way down in the expectations. There are a few things that are good for comparative purposes, which are advanced ticket sales.
Hmm.
Uh, they're often a little bit indicative, but in this case, with a franchise picture, it's hard to tell those are the rabid fans and they're going to come, and then is anyone else going to come the next night? So it's just that is what you don't know. There's something called tracking where they go out and starting 4 or 5 weeks before the movie is to open, they start asking people about what's coming and do they know of this and are they interested. So you kind of get that, and you know where you compared to the previous Evil Dead movie, to Black Phone, to Smile, to Insidious, and other horror movies. So you start to get a feel. Oh, if this stays true, and um, there's no big World Cup that night, and it looks like you're bracketed, but the bracket is $10 million, and that's so it's not really that meaningful. But uh, and as far as making the movie, we know that in the long run, it's better to make them less expensive than more expensive because it's easier to get somebody to pull the trigger.
Sticking with the money and going back to that before it all happens stage, when you're financing it, you've done a lot of films and TV. You've done a lot of Evil Dead titles. Is that easy now, or are you still affected by the sort of the general big picture stuff of how easy it is to finance films generally?
The hardest thing about making a movie is to get the money to make it. We're fortunate now with Evil Dead, after Evil Dead Rise, that that was successful and was made for a price, as they say. And so this particular picture and the one after it, there was a willingness up to a certain point in time to finance those movies. So as long as they're successful, as long as you can come in and say this is what we want to make it for, and then there's a whole department that just run profit and loss. Okay, if we make it for this and we know it can do that, and if it does 60% of what the previous one does, so there's the finance department, and they tell the executives uh, what the numbers are, and it has gotten easier on this. We have a plan in the future to maybe spin something off from this universe, and that'll have to go back and be done at a lower price. But
Hmm.
uh, and really, every movie or most movies have their own winding way to get financed. Uh, Many years ago, we used to finance territory by territory. Oh, you sell Brazil and you sell Italy and you sell Japan and you sell Australia. Um, Sometimes we've had studios, especially with TV, always with TV, but with studios come in and put up the money. And this one, it's the studios mainly, but there's France and the UK and a couple other territories that uh, the studios don't control, um, that have had the rights to the next Evil Dead movie since 1982. So
Wow. How do you do with the screen production rebate here? How, I mean, obviously it's money and money's always helpful, but how helpful is it in terms of putting together the project?
without the screen rebate, there would be no business in New Zealand. And the unfortunate thing is people look at the studio taskmasters by any other name. They look at the rebate and go, well, in New Zealand it's 20%, and maybe we could qualify for 25%. In Australia it's 30%. So we'll just go to Australia. But they don't look at payroll taxes or unions or the exchange rate. That's the next step down. So that headline is all important. And what happened here was there were lower cost movies being made 5, 8 years ago, even, and now that works all moved over to Ireland, where they have a 40% rebate, and the government cash flows that rebate from the beginning of production, so a certain percentage of it, so that they're actually financing you as you go, as opposed to having to put in for it or cash flow it through a bank ahead of time, who may only lend 80 or 85% of that money. So I think in Ireland they will cash flow 90% of your projected rebate during the production itself. Jason Blum, who does a tremendous amount of horror movies, he's moved his entire apparatus from Ireland, and he had kind of set up here. He had done the Megan movies and uh, Black Christmas and some other movies here in New Zealand, and they just up and went over to Ireland because that 40%. But it's when we've done a real analysis, it's still cheaper to shoot here, given the rebate, especially if you can get the 5% that are willing to do the exchange rate, and the lack of payroll taxes that everyone's an independent contractor. So yes, it's very meaningful. It's very, very meaningful.
What did you have to do for the 5% uplift on this one?
Well, they changed, what's quite interesting, they changed the rules during the course of our production. So when we started, we were just going for the 20% rebate on the first picture we were shooting here. And then they changed some of the requirements, and we were able to hit it by doing the pickups here, which put us over the threshold, the financing threshold, and they changed how the points were calculated. We have done a bunch of intern programs, which I did a master class that's housed on the Screen Guild's site here, about how to finance your movie, how to work with a bond company, how to work with Hollywood talent. I think young filmmakers would find informative, and hopefully helpful to their journey. It is geared towards doing post. I'm doing a second movie that's in post right now, and we're doing all of post here. And so if you really commit to doing the production and the post production here, you've qualified. You really have qualified. So, but it is that, but equally, the government has put in some funny little rules that I think are going to hurt. What they what they used to allow is the DP and the production designer to come from offshore, come here, do a scout, look at everything, and go away. And then when they came back, if they were gone for a month or 2 months, however long before the production actually started going, the IRD now counts that first trip in as your 183 days. So it makes a bunch of people fall into the New Zealand
Oh,
tax
yep.
resident, which is just a bunch of accounting nightmare and accounting fees, because there's no real double taxation, but it's scary to everybody. So I know that people on the now paused Helldiver fell into that, and I had some people on this latest movie fall into that, and that's just really being short-sighted. I don't know. IRD wouldn't have done it if the ministry, somebody in ministry, hadn't pushed for it. I don't know who that person is, but it was short-sighted thinking.
Thank you. Good to speak out on those sorts of things so that people are aware of those risks. On the subject of sort of people coming into work on these sorts of productions, obviously like the Screen Industry Guild, they're quite supportive of inbound productions coming and shooting in New Zealand because that's great for their members. A lot of work for crew, similarly with Equity, a lot of opportunities for local actors. The Directors Guild and the Writers Guild have traditionally been the ones who found these productions more difficult because it's rare. With features, a little bit different with TV, but with features, there's not often much in the way of opportunity for their members as directors or writers. From said before, you've done plenty of these now. Can you see a route for New Zealand writers or directors to take part in some of these franchise titles?
The opportunity here for writers and directors is to come up through the local industry. For big franchises coming in, they have Hollywood writers or they have people in that writing process. So there's really no opportunity for writers, whether it's in television or in features. Directorially in television, I've worked with so many great New Zealand directors in television. In features, there are some really good directors here. The problem is hooking them up with a script that originates in the States or even as a co-production in Ireland or that. For some reason, writing is a challenge outside the Hollywood community as a whole. The writers, well, that's not true. The British have a tremendously great writing system, and people come up through it and do very well. Here in New Zealand, there are certain impediments to writing, which is, because I've spoken and I've talked to writers here, they expect to be paid by the Film Commission to go off and write something. And writers write. I've known great novelists in my lifetime and writers who became big Hollywood writers, and they write. They wrote every morning. They wrote something. They got up, they did whatever they were going to do, and they sat down for 2 or 3 hours and wrote something, and then did their day job or did whatever they were going to do. And that sort of discipline of a writer, there are very few people here who have it. And if they do have it, they've ended up in the television industry, and because that's the easiest path to have a great spec feature here that you can put together with a New Zealand director or even a Hollywood director and get financing behind it is a real long shot. It's just a long shot. It's a challenge, but there are plenty for its size. There's far more writer directors that have come out of New Zealand than out of any city in America of a similar size of 5 million people.
I think that's something that the Film Commission has supported, over for a long period of time, really, in terms of giving people that first shot.
I think 20 years ago, they tried quite hard to get a follow-up fund for second-time directors who had come through and had been successful. And I don't think that ultimately worked the way that they wanted it to. I don't know what happened to it, but I remember a guy, David Gascoigne, who oversaw that at the time. It's hard to make a movie, no matter how easy. It's hard to make movies. I'm listening to something called What Went Wrong, a podcast, and it's behind the scenes on all different movies. You're just reminded there was no smooth sailing on any movie.
In terms of stuff that you've got coming up, I was at Big Screen Symposium over the weekend, and there was a session with a couple of creators called Owning Your Voice, and they're sort of younger creators, sort of in their 30s, and talking about how they have developed their careers so far, sort of what they think they're strong at, what they think they're interested in. And they talked at one point about the risk of being pigeonholed. You're known very much for horror, and specifically, and genre more broadly, but is there stuff that is sort of that bubbles away that you think, I'd like to have a go at that?
Sure, I'd love to do a massive musical, but I'm not. But nobody's going to finance it for me. Did musicals back in television even before it was a thing. So, yeah, it's I don't know if you get truly pigeonholed. And I'll use an example. Taika managed to avoid being pigeonholed coming out of New Zealand, and so if you're talented and people recognize the talent, whether you did a comedy or a horror or whatever, um, there is a way for you to expand that canvas. And most directors have some sort of personality that they infuse into everything that they did, whether it's a sense of humor or a sense of drama or whatever it was. And that's going to shine through unless somebody squashes it along the way in the production. So I think the concern of being pigeonholed for anything is something people say when for whatever reason the next job doesn't land. Is it easy to say that these guys are good at that? Look, once upon a time I did a lot of action stuff. A guy, Jean-Claude Van Damme, a bunch of his movies, did action TV. But for us, the reason we formed a dedicated horror film company once upon a time is that there's always a marketplace for it. It can be done at a low cost, and um, it narrowed what we were doing. I had partners who went and ran studios actually, and they did other movies and had big successes, Juno and some Will Ferrell movies. But ultimately, that kind of, we do somewhat arty movies. Defining what you do and then chasing that is just so time consuming and expensive. All those independents couldn't support the overhead required to do that, even if you have successes. So we've kind of kept our blinders on for doing things. Would I like to branch out and do other things? Yes. We continually talk about inexpensive thrillers. We did one 10 years ago that was very successful. And it's finding the right script. So yeah, I have one coming out that's a World War II movie, Play Dead, through Netflix, and that our brand worked within the confines of still a World War II action movie, which was a tense thriller.
As we said at the start, Evil Dead Burn is opening in cinemas this week. Other than get along and see it, is there anything else that you'd like to say about the film?
I believe that this is the launching pad for the director of this movie, Sebastian Vanacek, who's going to have a big career in Hollywood, much like Fede Alvarez, who did an Evil Dead movie in 2013. My guess is Sebastian is quite a muscular filmmaker, and he wants to step into the shoes of some of the muscular franchises that exist that are always looking for directors. So my guess is he will, his brand of filmmaking and his style of filmmaking will lead him well down those roads.
Thank you very much for talking with us. All the best.
Thank you, Keith.